Hello everyone, welcome to Lessons with A and welcome to another lesson in our Lessons for A1 level learners. And in this lesson, we'll be looking at the verb to do in the present tense. Let's begin. What do we use the verb to do in the present tense for? We use the verb to do in the present tense to talk about when we are performing or making a specific action. So when you are doing or making something very specific, a very specific action, that is when we use the verb to do in the present tense form. An example is, I do my homework every day. In this example, we see we are performing or doing something very specific, and the action that we are making here is what? Doing your homework. So when you are performing, when you want to talk about you performing an everyday action or a very specific action, we use the verb to do in the present tense to talk about it. Another usage of the verb to do in the present tense is we can use it as an auxiliary verb, which is a helping verb to ask questions for negative questions or negative sentences, and sometimes to give emphasis on something that we are saying. So we can use it as a helping verb, that is, it will be used with another verb, which will be called a main verb. That means we will have the verb to do in the present tense plus another verb. And we do this to ask questions for negatives and sometimes to give emphasis on something that we are saying. Examples: do you like pizza? Here we have used the verb to do in the present tense to ask somebody a question whether they like pizza or not. The second one, she doesn't eat at night. We have used the verb to do here as a negative, doesn't, does not, which is a negative way of expressing the verb to do. And then the last one, he does eat a lot. Here also, we are using the verb to do to place emphasis on eating a lot. So he does. That means we are really trying to emphasize that the person we are talking about eats a lot. And you can see in all of the sentences that apart from the verb to do, we have another verb, a main verb in the sentences. The first one we have do, and then the main verb is like. Second one we have doesn't, and then the main verb is eat. The third one we have does, and the main verb is also what? Eat. Now let's see the structure of the verb to do in the present tense. So for the subject I, the verb form is still do. An example is, I do my homework every day. For the subject you, the verb form is do. An example, you do the bigger one. For the subjects he or she or it, the verb form is does. And an example, he does not run fast. For the subject we, the verb form is do. An example, we do the dishes on the weekend. For the subject they, the verb form is do. An example, they do not see me. Now, as I always say, the tip here is for the plural subjects, that is you, we, and they, we use the verb form do. And then for the singular subject, he, she, and it, we use does. So we add an es to do. We add an es to the base form of the verb to do to give us the verb form for the subjects he, she, and it, which are singular subject. The subject I also takes the verb form do. So for I, you, we, and they, so for I and the plural subject, we use do. And for the singular subject, we add an es to the base form of the verb to do to give us does. So he does, she does, it does. But I do, you do, we do, they do. Now, let's see how we can use the verb to do to ask questions. We use do or does depending on the subject we will use, okay? So the basic structure, do or does plus the subject plus the main verb. Remember we said that when we are using the verb to do to ask questions or form negatives or form emphasis, it needs a main verb to help it. So it is functioning as an auxiliary or a helping verb. Now let's see some examples. Do you like pizza? Does she play football? Do I watch TV? Do they eat a lot? In all of the examples, depending on the subject that we used, we either use do or does, and then the subject, and then the main verb, which are highlighted in red, and the rest of the sentence. So the first example, do you like pizza? We use do because the subject we use here was you, and you takes the verb form do of the verb to do. Our main verb here is like, and then for pizza, which is the rest of the sentence. So do you like pizza? Does she play football? Our subject here was she, and as such, we use does, which is the verb form of the verb to do when we use a singular subject like she. Our main verb, highlighted in red, is play, and football, the rest of the sentence, and giving us, does she play football? And as such, the rest of the sentences go. Now, how do we use it to form negatives? For negatives, we use the subject plus do or does, depending on the subject, remember, plus not, plus the main verb. And you can also take into consideration that instead of using do not or does not, you can say don't, which is a contraction or the short form of do not. Or you can use doesn't, which is the short form of does not. Let's see some examples. He doesn't like apples. I do not see the cup. They don't sleep at night. You don't draw well. You should also remember here that when we use the verb to do in negatives, it is functioning as a helping verb, and as such, it needs a main verb to help. So in the examples here, all the main verbs are highlighted in red. And in the first example, our subject, remember subject, is he, which is a singular subject. So we need to use does, which is the verb form for singular subject, like he. And then we add not. But instead of saying does not, we said doesn't, which is the short form of does not. And then our main verb, like, and the rest of the sentence. It goes the same way in the second one, our subject, I. And then because I takes do as its verb form, we have do not, and our main verb see, and the cup, the rest of the sentence. The third one too, they don't sleep at night, it has a main verb, the subject, and then don't. Because the subject they is plural, it takes do. And then to make it a negative, we add not. But instead of saying do not, we said they don't. The same thing happens in you don't draw well. So negatives, depending on the subject, remember you either use do or does, plus not, plus the main verb. Now let's do a quick recap of all we've learned so far. Now we have learned that we use the verb to do to talk about specific actions when we are doing them or when we are making them, and then we can also use it to make questions or negatives or to play emphasis, but in those cases, it is only used as a helping verb, an auxiliary verb to help a main verb. So here is a table to help us recall all we've learned so far. So for the subject I, the main verb form is do. For questions, you say do I, and then for negatives, you say I don't. For you, the main verb form do. Questions, do you? For negatives, you do not or you don't. For he or she or it, main verb form is does. For questions, it's does he or does she or does it. For negatives, he doesn't, he does not, she doesn't, she does not, it doesn't, it does not. For we have do we don't, or we do not. For they, main verb form is do. Questions, do they? Negatives, they don't or they do not. Now this will be all for this lesson so far. I hope you are able to learn and have as much fun as you could. And if you need a grammar book that has been specifically made for everybody who's learning English, and it has everything you will need to build a good and solid foundation in grammar, check out the description and find a link to get one of them. You can also find another link to book a lesson or private class for yourself. I will see you in the next lesson.